Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Davis. I'm with the International Code Council. Wanted to welcome you to our deep dive webinar on the Federal Emergency Management Agency's BRIC Codes Plus Up grant funding opportunity. Following up on our webinar from earlier this month, the Code Council is eager to share more detail on the application process with all of you and discuss ways for you and your communities to maximize this unprecedented opportunity, including how to get started. Additional information, including answers to frequently asked questions, can be found on the Code Council's website at www.iccsafe.org/BRIC, BRIC, as well as FEMA's website at www.fema.gov/BRIC. Before we dive in, here's a look at our agenda. We'll briefly review what BRIC is, as well as the dedicated funding for codes this grant cycle. We'll discuss how to use the funds for building code activities, ways the Code Council can assist you with your grant applications and potential awards, and have a step-by-step demonstration of the FEMA GO sub-application, followed by an opportunity to address any outstanding questions. So throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A function, and my colleagues, our FEMA experts, and I will do our best to respond to you. Next up, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We've assembled an incredible group of experts for you to learn from today. Stella Carr is the Energy and Resilience Project Manager here at ICC. Her role at the Code Council is to support members in taking full advantage of the federal grants available for building code activities. John Chipperfield from the FEMA BRIC Technical Services team has joined us, and Sean Servas from the FEMA GO team that supports BRIC is also on the line. Next, I'll provide a brief overview of BRIC. FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant Program, or BRIC, is the successor program to the earlier Pre-Disaster Mitigation, or PDM program. BRIC now serves as the agency's primary pre-disaster mitigation grant program and is the result of the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018, or DURA. DURA was the outcome of years of frustration by Congress and amongst those in the emergency management space over inconsistent annual appropriations for federal pre-disaster mitigation assistance. Following decades of increasingly costly and more devastating natural disasters, Congress established a pre-disaster mitigation program in DURA, funded using a calculation of prior year's disasters, recognizing the return on investment to the federal taxpayer that pre-disaster mitigation investments pay in reducing disaster-related losses of life and property. Of all mitigation activities, adoption and enforcement of modern consensus-based building codes has been proven to provide an at least 11-to-1 return for base codes and even greater benefits for above code activities. Now, I will pass it over to John to share more information and specifics about BRIC and the Building Codes Plus Up that are new for this year. John?
Thank you, Aaron. Hello, everyone. To start off, we're going to talk about the available funding for the fiscal year 23 BRIC cycle. And we have $1 billion is available for the BRIC program in fiscal year 2023. There are 4 funding mechanisms this year: the state and territory allocation, Building Code Plus Up for territory, state, and tribal applicants, the tribal set-aside, and also the national competition. State territory allocations consist of $112 million with up to $2 million per applicant. All 50 states, the District of Columbia, and U.S. territories may apply under the state territory allocation. A total of $1.5 million must be used for capability and capacity building activities per applicant. The tribal set-aside is $50 million. All federally recognized tribal governments may apply under the tribal set-aside. The tribal set-aside can be used for capability and capacity building CNCB activities and hazard mitigation projects. The combined cost of the applicant's CNCB activities under the tribal set-aside must not exceed $2 million per applicant, and up to $1 million may be used for hazard mitigation planning and planning-related activities per applicant. Next, I'm going to talk about the previous slide still. The new state territory building code plus up $112 million is set aside for building code plus ups for state and territories, and tribal building code plus up for is $25 million. So building code plus up funds may only be applied to eligible building code activities and may not be used for other BRIC eligible projects or activities. Funds not allocated to the eligible building code activities will result in a loss of funds. The rest of the $1 billion is set aside for the national competition for hazard mitigation projects. Next slide, please. Okay. So we acknowledge the importance of using the latest building codes at the state, local, tribal, and territorial levels. Therefore, BRIC has dedicated additional funds through a state or territory and tribal building code plus up for fiscal year 2023. To carry out eligible building code adoption and enforcement activities, building codes are good for communities, but we understand under BRIC, communities that don't have them are at a disadvantage in our competitive program. So disadvantaged communities who don't have buildings or don't have building codes may have trouble adopting them by themselves due to funding, capacity, and capability limitations. However, with this new funding, we're going to try throw as much money as we can to help. So for fiscal year 2023, like I said before, up to $112 million is going to be available, which is $2 million per state and territory. And this is only available for building code activities in the plus up. The tribal nations will also have their own $25 million set aside. Like previously stated, these funds can only be used for building code related activities and are use or lose. So there's three criteria that these building codes fall into. We understand the importance of building codes when it comes to resilience, and the purpose is to encourage building code adoption and enforcement activities in these three main areas, which are evaluating the adoption and implementation of codes that reduce risk, enhance existing adopted codes to incorporate more current requirements or standards, and also to develop professional workforce capabilities through technical assistance and training. We have created program support material that goes through a lot of examples of eligible projects, and these funds can be used in ways to help communities with or without state adopted codes. Next slide, please. The building code plus up is similar to the state and territory allocation from previous fiscal years, with, like I said before, with a big exception, the funding can only be used for building code related activities and cannot be used for anything else. This funding is in addition to the state and territory allocation funding and the tribal set aside, which you can use those funds for additional building code activities if needed. The adoption and enforcement of building codes, specifications, and standards is an important mitigation activity that provides significant resilience benefits, and currently many tribal nations, territories, and communities are using BRIC funds to adopt or enhance their current building codes. Next slide, please. Okay, so for communities without adopted building codes, these funds can be used to evaluate which model codes would be most suited to the community, with the funding going to staff time, consulting costs, or code review committees. If communities have already decided to adopt the latest building codes, they can use this funding not only to adopt or develop building codes, but adopt specifications and standards that make the community more resilient. These are just examples and not exhaustive list. More eligible activities can be found within the BRIC Building Code Activities Program Support Materials, which we'll have some resources at the end of the presentation. And I'm going to go through a few examples of a couple of these activity types. So a couple examples from previous sub-applicants that were submitted to BRIC were, we have the Augustine Band of Cahuilla Mission Indians from California who are implementing new codes. So they are spending funding on a cost and constructability report that will help them decide which updated building code is best for their community. American Samoa is also doing something where their goal is to adopt the international codes with legislation specifying American Samoa amendments becoming in line with other territories by adopting the international codes. We also have Next, we have the enhance existing adopted codes, and this is primarily for states and territories, tribal nations, and communities with adopted building codes already. So they can use the funding to modify their current building code requirements by updating to the latest code edition or updating or incorporating more current requirements or higher standards within their building codes. Some previous BRIC projects include the Swinomish Indian tribal community in Washington in using data generated in the wildfire mapping project, along with procured legal services to evaluate and develop code updates for the tribe. The Indiana Department of Homeland Security is updating their existing building codes to incorporate more current requirements to eliminate risk and damage from future natural hazards, which increase resiliency and promote a culture of preparedness. And lastly on this, funds can also be used to develop professional workforce capabilities. Regardless if the community has adopted codes, it can be used to develop planning and trainings. For instance, the International Code Council offers trainings on their building codes anywhere from changes to the codes to training inspectors. So communities can improve their code enforcement by evaluating processes, implement an inspection program, or improve their building code effectiveness grading schedule, also referred to as BSEGs. In communities with adopted building codes, in order to streamline the process of plan reviews, permitting, and inspections, you can develop or acquire software and hardware. You can also, the purchase of publications, code standards, or specifications will enhance the workforce to have easy accessibility to the updated codes. And this funding can be used to engage consulting services, building department accreditation, or conduct public awareness outreach activities also. Some previous BRIC projects for workforce and capabilities are the City of St. Paul, Minnesota is using funding to implement a system that allows for virtual inspections. The Maine Office of State Fire Marshal is developing virtual trainings for their code officials. So far, they have delivered around 20 trainings so far. I think there might be more now, but it's pretty great stuff. And then the City of Hartford, Connecticut is pursuing accreditation through the International Accreditation Service, which will enhance their code enforcement throughout the city. Again, these were only a few examples of what has previously been done. The BRIC webpage has a list of all selected projects from the past BRIC cycles, and the PSM is a great resource to go to for more ideas. Now I will pass it back over to Aaron. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate the overview there. I think now we're going to go to Sean Servas, also with FEMA, to discuss how to apply for these BRIC grants.
All right. Hi, everybody. As Aaron said, I'm Sean Servas at FEMA headquarters and coming to you today from my wonderful basement office. In software development language, I'm the what they call a subject matter expert for the FEMA GO system. And we're going to jump right into how to use the system and what you're going to be looking at when you actually go to fill out your sub application for one of these building code projects. So I'm just going to dive right into it. What I'm going to do is just create a sub application and kind of give you an overview of what the system looks like and what you're going to see when you actually fill out the sub application. So when you go to sign up to participate in the BRIC grant program, all the applications come in through this system called FEMA GO, and it's just go.fema.gov. This is where you go to sign up, and you will create an account. It's just like signing up for any other web page. Super easy. The tricky part is getting set up with your organization or your sub-organization. So states, tribes, and territories, like John mentioned, they're eligible direct grant applicants and grant recipients under legislation. And if you're a sub-agency in a state, or if you're a local municipality, you're going to be a sub-applicant to the state. So you're going to need to communicate with your state on that and make sure that you get set up correctly. And that's kind of a whole demonstration in itself, so I'm not going to get into the weeds on that. And anyway, so once you get set up and you log into the FEMA GO system, I'm in the test environment here. This is what you're going to see on your home page, depending on what roles you have. And you can see I've got a flood mitigation assistance grant and a BRIC grant over here because I'm logged in as a direct grant recipient of federally recognized Indian tribe, quote unquote, in the test environment here. And if you scroll down in the list of available funding opportunities on the right-hand side of the screen here, you'll see, I need to use a specific one for this to work right. You'll see start sub-application, and that's what you're going to want to click on to begin this whole process of creating a sub-application. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And then it asks you to identify who you are and who you're applying to. So, you know, in most of your cases, you'll only have one option for who you're applying to. If you're a grant writer, a professional grant writer or something, you might belong to multiple organizations. So it could be different. And then you want to identify who you are as well. And you should probably only have one choice there. I have a whole bunch of choices because of the nature of the test environment. So we want to give a title to our sub-application. And this is an important part right here, the sub-application type. And you're going to want to choose a project for building codes. If you choose one of these other project scoping or plan or whatever, you can't go back and change your mind later and switch it to something else. You're stuck. You just have to start over from scratch. So you want to choose a project sub-application. And this information is pulled automatically from the System for Award Management, the General Services Administration, SAM.gov. So depending on how you have your entity set up in SAM.gov, that information will be automatically pulled in here. So you don't actually enter this information. It gets sucked in automatically from SAM.gov. And so I'm going to do that. And I'm going to kind of drive fast here and just focus on the important parts as we go through this to get to the meat of the what's important for a building code sub-application, which is mostly in the scope of work section. So I'm just going to zip through this real quick. You bear with me. And hopefully this showing y'all this will kind of seed some questions in your mind about how to apply, and we'll have time for that at the end to get to those. And while I'm doing this, actually, one thing we talked about the building code plus up funding category. That's not identified in the sub application. That happens when you submit the sub application up to the direct grant applicant, and they actually choose what funding category to put your sub application in. So we don't have to worry about that when we're creating the sub application. This community list, if you're filling this out, it's not a complete list of every community. So if you don't see exactly what you're looking for, don't panic. Just pick the closest thing and provide a comment. And I need to do this, I think. And that should be good. Okay, this is what I was wanting to get to. This is the scope of work section. You can see all the different sections of the sub-application listed out over here on the left side. And some of this stuff is going to be not applicable, but we'll get to that here in just a second. All right, so this is what's important right here. For your primary activity type in your scope of work sub-application for a project sub-application. So you've got a project sub-application over here. We're in the scope of work. There is a place to select codes and standards as your primary activity type. And then it gives you the sub-activity, as John mentioned. There's different things you can do. He gave the 3 examples there of training and technical assistance, and then actually evaluating or adopting new codes. And there's a catch-all for other too if it doesn't fit neatly into one of those categories. So for this demonstration, I'm just going to pick evaluation of existing codes. And then it also allows you to identify a secondary activity type if you wanted to, if you're doing more than one activity. And okay, it even gives you a tertiary, so you can keep going. I think it stops at 3, but I'm just going to put in 2. And another feature in or another data point they like to capture in the scope of work is the community lifelines that are applicable to your proposed mitigation activity. So that could be all kinds of different stuff. Whoops. Oop. I think, is that an optional field? That is an optional field. And we would not be doing construction in this. And these are the basic questions in the scope of work. Like they mentioned, the program support materials is where you need to go to understand all the details that need to be present in a good application. I'm not the guy to speak to that, but we kind of all know that the scope of work is the who, what, how, where, and when of everything that's going to go on with this proposed mitigation activity. So I'm just going to run through these questions and show you what submitting a sub-application looks like. Interesting. I forgot that they added this question about nature-based solutions, which I don't think building codes are going to have a nature-based solution component. Continue. It's worth mentioning the these are proposed dates, right? We don't know if your project is going to get selected or when it's going to be awarded or anything like that. So this is just your best guess on when you think that would start. This is something where I said some of these fields are not going to fit neatly with a building codes sub-application because the project location could be statewide, it could be countywide, it could be apply to specific things. So it's a little bit of a square peg in a round hole on some of these sections of the sub-application. And obviously you're not going to have a specific pinpoint location like if you were actually doing a earth moving project. So less than ideal, but can make it fit. I think it wants all 6 digits. The project location is broken out into 3 different sections: the general project location, the project benefiting area, and the project impact area. And these, like I said, is kind of a square peg in a round hole for a building codes sub-application. And then if this was something that was actually required a project site inventory, like if you were actually working on buildings and you could enter that information here, you can just select no, I would think, because you're not going to be addressing specific structures in this sub-application. It's more of a administrative project. So I'm going to continue. Budget is pretty straightforward. I will show you a couple of details here. I think they touched on subrecipient management costs. You have to enter an item. So now that I've entered one item into my cost estimate, it presents the add cost type button again to me. So I'm going to add that. And this is where you can select your subrecipient management cost type. I call them buckets. So if you've read the BRIC notice of funding opportunity, you'll know that there's a 5% subrecipient management cost that you're eligible to apply for. So if you fill out the subrecipient management cost and the budget correctly, you'll have the 2 different cost types. And it also breaks them down additionally below. So you can see your cost share split out 75-25, and then you can identify that your 5% subrecipient management cost is 100% federal share for the BRIC program. Different grant programs have different cost share requirements, of course, that you'd have to pull out of the notice of funding opportunity. And somebody that has more program knowledge than me, is there a cost effectiveness? Is a benefit cost analysis required for building code sub-applications? I don't know.
It is not.
Yeah,
it's not? Okay.
It was waived.
It's waived? Okay, great. Thank you. I should know that off the top of my head, but I didn't. So there is the ability to select not applicable for the cost effectiveness. And when you check that, it's going to want you to provide a justification statement. And can continue. This is another example of a kind of a square peg in a round hole. It's going to ask you a bunch of questions about our EHP review, as if this was a surface disturbing activity. And this doesn't apply to building codes sub-application. So I would just go through and check no to all this stuff. And if you have any questions about that, you could certainly talk to your whoever your state or BRIC grant expert is on that. But I would assume that this is all going to be no, because there's no surface disturbing activity going to take place. And just think there's a few more. Okay, that was it. And then that takes you to your technical evaluation criteria section. These are all the technical evaluation criteria questions, and there's points involved in those. I haven't memorized those from the notice of funding opportunity, and that would be something you want to educate yourself on. If you answer yes to these questions, it'll ask for additional information, and you can fill that out. So I'm just going to go through quickly and select no. This is a summary of your comments and attachments. Then it asks you to sign the electronic representation of the standard form 424B here for the request for federal assistance. That's another item to ask your state about, is if they're going to require this as an attachment as well, like the real form that you can get from grants.gov. I've heard different takes on that from different states. So check with your state person if they're going to require an actual attachment with a wet signature on it. And that is a complete, quote unquote, complete sub-application. And then you can see that the status has changed here. We get the submit for signature button and it's pending submission. So I'll click on submit for signature and it'll take me back up to the top of the sub-application. And you can, that would be if, say, someone was preparing the sub-application and then a different person was going to have their actual signature on it, their electronic signature on it for submitting to the direct grant applicant. So I'm going to submit for signature. Take me back up to the top of the sub-application. And I can just take a shortcut to sign and submit. And it asks you for your electronic, or the same password that you use to log into FEMA GO. This is also actually where you could return to editing if you needed to. And we'll just go ahead and submit. I should also mention, while you're working on your sub-application, while it's still in draft form pending submission, your state person can work on it with you simultaneously if you need to team up on that. So this sub-application has been submitted to recipient, and they will take it from there. They'll put it in the building code plus up funding category for you if that's their priority. And there's a process that they'll follow at the state level to review and approve and submit that to FEMA.
I have a question, Sean. If they need to reassign someone else to be the signatory, where would you do that? Because it looked like when you went to sign, it was just for you, the person that filled it out. In the sub-applicant information, would you need to designate someone else at that point?
Yeah, that's so I can go through how that works briefly. I'm going to click on my profile here, and you can. I'm using this account right here, Oklahoma Tribe number 2, and they have the subrecipient authorized representative role. That allows you to sign and submit sub applications. And this is a state level role or a grant applicant, a direct grant recipient level role. It's the authorized organization representative. And that's the role that your state person is going to have. And they can provide you with this subrecipient authorized representative role after you create your account. So that's all managed at the state level through your organization and your sub-organizations. Let's say that I'm the state of wherever, the state of North Carolina, and I want to add one of my sub-agencies of the state or one of my municipalities as a sub-organization. They would do that here. And I could add my county, and then I can add a sub sub-organization authorized representative here in my manage user access for the sub-organization. So that's how you would designate who can sign that sub-application, is who has the subrecipient or the sub-organization authorized representative role. Or I guess they call it subrecipient authorized representative. Oops. I'm so used to using the acronym, I can't even remember what the it's for. So did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And I'm
Okay.
sure folks, as you go through this process, you may have questions trying to figure out who your organization or entity's SAM administrator is. A good first step. I noted in the Q&A that if somebody from your organization has submitted or received federal funding in the past, then you probably already have a UEI number, you probably already have SAM.gov account for your entity, and you may need to connect with whoever that individual is in your organization to set you up with these user permissions in FEMA Go so that you can fill it out or even submit as your signatory for the organization, etc. But that was a great overview, Sean. I appreciate it. We can.
Yeah, I think you've shared out these where are they? These links to the different kind of
Yes.
user guides on how to do all that. There's
Yes. In
yeah,
the if you want to drop that that link as well, I can share it with everybody if you put it in our chat. But in
sure.
the registration page that you all received when you signed up for the webinar, there are files attached to that, and we will also send a follow-up email after the webinar with some additional resources. But there's a guide that FEMA has on how to navigate as a sub-applicant. There's various resources if you need help creating an account, if you run into issues. These are common things, and so there's different documents they have to assist, and there's a lot of resources available. So if you run into a snag, please don't hesitate to try to work through it, because as you saw, it can be a little confusing, but anything on the web can be at times. And so they've done a great job trying to develop resources to assist you with it. Let's transition. Lisa, if you're still there, can you share your screen, or do you need me to jump in? Okay, great. We can go to the next slides. So yeah, if you see the slide deck when we send that, you'll just see this high-level overview of FEMA GO. And if you click the next slide, this information is from the program support materials, which talk about what types of options you select, as Sean demonstrated within the application. But we will have this recording covering what Sean went over and share that with you all so you can see it step by step as well. But here's just sort of an overview of some of those questions he covered. Next slide, please. Again, there were some questions about different types of eligible expenses and things you can use for the grant, and we have some time for questions about that. But for example, you could use it for digital codes premium, third-party plan review, any of these types of services. And as Sean demonstrated in the budget section, this information would be something you summarize in the narrative questions, but you would also need to include an estimate of the cost and what task it would go with in your budget. And so if you need help with any of that, getting quotes from ICC and our service partners from our subsidiaries, we can work with you on getting that information so that you have it to support your application. Next slide. And this is a link to some of those resources as well from FEMA about BRIC. We also have our own BRIC website as well as the FEMA BRIC website, which has additional resources available when you're in these program support materials. There's one for almost all of the different programs, so you'll want to make sure you take a look at the building code one, and I believe that is linked as well in our files for this webinar. And if you go to the next slide, we have some time for questions. So if you have not submitted a question in the Q&A, please do so. There was one that we wanted to address. You do not, John, would you mind answering the question about the hazard mitigation plan for the Codes Plus up, please?
Absolutely. Hazard mitigation plans they're exempt for some capability and capacity building activity types, such as hazard mitigation planning, planning related activities, partnerships, and building codes. So you do not need a hazard mitigation plan for building code activities. But for the majority of BRIC, you would need hazard mitigation plans for projects.
Thank you. There was a question about when the grants are awarded and the funds become available. Typically, the grants are going to be awarded in the end of next summer or early fall. We saw this fall is when applicants from fiscal year 2022 were awarded, but the funds are still not available for those grants. They're still finalizing those projects. So you're going to be applying for this fiscal year 23 with the application deadlines we discussed. You can expect probably your projects will begin in early 2025. If anyone from FEMA disagrees with that assumption, please jump in, but that is what we've been telling folks based on what we've seen happen with the previous program cycles. Along those lines, there's a question about reimbursement. My understanding is you cannot get reimbursed with the grant funds for expenses that you've already incurred or that you incur while you're waiting to find out if you were selected. It would only be expenses that you have once you've been signed a contract for the grant award with your state and with FEMA. So just keep that in mind. It's not guaranteed that you're going to get the funding, and it's not guaranteed that they will let you submit reimbursement for anything you spend, let's say, in the next year while this is in review. John, there's a question about scoring criteria and technical evaluation. Do you feel, could you share a little bit about that as it pertains to the Codes Plus Up? If you're the right person for that.
Yep. Since these are allocations, it's allocation funding. The scoring criteria doesn't affect the allocations. So the scoring criteria is specifically for the competition. So, but if you want to know more about the technical and qualitative evaluation criteria, I would recommend you go to the FEMA's BRIC webpage and look for the webinars, because there's webinars on the NOFO and also on technical and qualitative scoring criteria specifically.
There was a question about whether you can change your application once you've submitted it. Sean or John, do you have insight to that?
If you've submitted it to the state, but it has not been submitted to FEMA, there'll still be an opportunity to change it. Once it's submitted to FEMA, it's pretty much locked down until it's selected. And then if it's selected, they can do a request for information for some things, and that gets into a bunch of program specific stuff that I don't know exactly when an RFI would be allowable and not allowable. But yeah, there is the opportunity, definitely, when you've submitted it to the state, to kick that back and forth. Either they can edit it or they can send it back to you for editing. Once it's submitted to FEMA, it's closed for editing until, if it is selected, they might be able to do a request for information to collect additional information.
And what we've seen from our conversations with state hazard mitigation offices so far about this BRIC Codes Plus Up is that, just as Sean said, it could become back and forth with your state. So these deadlines, which are nearing and just coming up within the next couple of weeks in some cases, you would want to fill out that sub-application that Sean just went through to the best of your ability and make sure you get that into your state. But let's say you get a more refined understanding of how much something's going to cost, or you need to adjust the dates for your proposed tasks or something like that. The state might ask you for clarification. You might be able to work with them to adjust that, because the time between, let's say your deadline is December 15th, and when the state has to submit to FEMA February 29th, it's to make sure that your sub-applications are filled out, and ready to submit to FEMA. And so it's not, because this isn't a competitive program with the Codes Plus Up, it doesn't necessarily hurt you if you need to make that revision. But if you don't submit at all by the state's internal deadline, then they won't have enough time to make sure everything's in order, make sure they've reviewed your application, and can ask for any additional information that they might need from you. So, even if it's not perfect, but you need to get it in by that deadline, be sure to do so and communicate with your state so that they can help, because in many cases, states are still looking to receive applications. And if they have none, they can't submit and utilize that 2 million. So they need to know what around how much they're going to be allocating with this program. And they'll know that based on what you submit in your sub-application. There were a couple other questions in the chat I'm just trying to review. There was one about the nature-based solutions and sort of how the BRIC program is going to align with the current state of codes and standards. I'm trying to understand the second part of that question, but in the case where you go through the application and you see those questions, that they're more so for the infrastructure based portions of BRIC, which are through the capability and capacity funding or flood mitigation program. Those are just sort of standard questions that BRIC has to go through. But as Sean mentioned, if it doesn't apply, you're not going to be judged negatively for that, because they understand it's not relevant to the building codes program. So you don't have to go stretching things too far if it isn't relevant. If there's a more specific clarification on that question you need, feel free to ask another. But if anyone else had any insights from our panel to add to that question, please go ahead. There was a clarifying point about BRIC allowing reimbursement for pre-award costs. So that's just something to be aware of if it's not construction related. So let's say you need to hire a grant writer or support for getting the project up and going. I think those types of costs could be reimbursed, but it's definitely something to look into and that we can discuss further. I'm just trying to take a look at the questions. There's a question about submission for FEMA GO. So as Sean demonstrated, the sub-application is what gets submitted to your state, and the state can view your sub-application, and they also use FEMA GO to submit all of those sub-applications and their application to FEMA. But if Sean or John want to clarify that a bit more, please feel free.
Yeah, that's correct. You would submit to your state through FEMA GO. And I see Janelle's question too. I can take that one. And Janelle, it's still the same. You have to start over. You can't change the sub-application type or copy it, unfortunately. Then there's another one for pre-award costs. There are some eligible pre-award costs. I'm not an expert on what those are, but you should talk to your state or your FEMA contact, your FEMA regional contact about what an eligible pre-award cost would be.
There's a question about eligible equipment expenses under the Codes Plus Up. There was an earlier question about, plans tables or software for permitting. Those types of equipment costs, for iPads in order to access these tools in the field would be eligible. If there's a specific item or tool that you have a question about that doesn't seem to fit in, a category like a plans table or iPad or computer, laptop, please let us know and we can try to get you clarification on that. Those are typically the items we see covered as far as equipment. But, we've had questions come up about a drone, if you're trying to do like a remote virtual inspection program, any type of tools and technology you might need for that. As long as it's supporting a specific goal of your program and you can justify that, why you need that specific equipment, it's worth consideration. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Aaron. We tried to address as many of these questions as we can. I think there might have been a few we missed, but I'm going to drop, you'll see my information in a follow-up email. So if you need to, if we can put that final slide up again, people can see the federal grants email address, and then I'll pass it over to Aaron to wrap things up.
Great. Thank you so much, Stella. Also, thanks to John and Sean from FEMA for joining us today. That is all the time we have for today. As you can see on the slide, if you have any follow-up questions, you can email federalgrants@iccsafe.org. Additionally, we will be posting a recording of this webinar on our BRIC resource page, which is available at www.iccsafe.org/BRIC, B-R-I-C. There's also a link there to our earlier webinar as well as links to FEMA's BRIC site and additional resources on FEMA's website. Want to thank everyone for your interest again in this unprecedented grant opportunity that the Code Council has advocated for. and for taking the time to learn more about it from the Code Council and our friends at FEMA. I'd like to also thank my colleague Lisa Berger for running the webinar in the background, for all of her efforts, and Stella as well for all of her efforts in working with our membership in seeking these grant dollars and providing our members with the assistance to successfully apply for these grants moving forward. And want to wish you all happy holidays and a great remainder of your day, as well as best wishes for your grant applications moving forward. Please do not hesitate to reach out if there's any information that we can provide or any assistance that we can provide to you as you seek these federal resources for building code activities, which we are extremely excited about. So thank you all. Have a great day.